Dr. Balboni, I want to ask you, because I thought our phone conversation on Sunday was pretty interesting. You've been in the FDA. You've been a physician in Department of Defense. You've been in government, but now you're on the outside. I really want to ask you two questions. One, can you describe why government doesn't have the incentive to run these trials? We know the private sector doesn't. They cost millions and millions of dollars. And if it's a generic drug, there's no incentive other than in government. And it should be the NIH or the CDC, the FDA, that advocates for all citizens, for all patients, regardless of the financial incentive, but to look at repurposing drugs. Can you describe why that did not occur? Because one of the things we talked about is we had these drugs in our toolkit for a pandemic. I think Dr. Fauci talked about hydroxychloroquine, the drug that your company is trying to go through trial now. That was kind of in the toolkit. It was designed for pandemics, and all of a sudden we hit COVID. It's like that toolbox drawer was shut and locked, and we ignored it. So can you just kind of describe that process and the lack of incentives?
Sure, and great question, and I'll try and do so with the utmost respect for my colleagues and former colleagues in government, because I think at the end of the day, people are trying to do the right thing, and I have to say that. And sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. And to your question about why, we're working on favipiravir. I first saw that as part of the Ebola outbreak in 2014, and it showed an effect in treating Ebola. And then everyone kind of forgot about it. And the pressure to move quickly went away. It's approved for pandemic flu in Japan. It's approved for COVID-19 in India and Russia. It's likely to be approved in Japan for COVID-19 imminently. The FDA is not moving as quickly, although we're having very fruitful discussions with them. I think that we are treating, unfortunately, many of these products as if they were for chronic diseases. And that may work well in a non-pandemic situation. And that's the structure of these organizations is to review thoughtfully and take the time to look at all the data. And again, I'm not suggesting we don't do that, but in addition to that, we have to push these agencies. There has to be a forcing function for change. And when under stress, I think they fall back on what they know, which is reviewing and approving drugs like cardiovascular drugs, which they can take more time with. So I think there needs to be both a forcing function for supporting their efforts to move outside of what is tried and true in their review process. And I think you as a committee and as politicians have your hands on that lever. Whether it's policy or law, there needs to be a forcing function to move them out of the ways that they do things, which again work in a non-pandemic situation. And I would point to two things, Senator. Public Law 11592. I worked on that when I was inside the DoD. That was a law signed into effect in 2017, which mandates that the DoD and FDA hold discussions and talks around regulated products that are of particular interest to the warfighter. And it puts them on an accelerated approval track. It doesn't cut corners, but it allows the regulators to devote resources to those kinds of accelerated discussions. I would also point to a very recent development, and politics notwithstanding, it shouldn't matter, a very pragmatic approach to doing the same kind of work as the RESULT Act submitted by Senators Cruz and Lee. Without having done, I did some reading of that, and it seems like a very pragmatic approach to push and force some change on the regulatory agencies to move things along more quickly. I have to say, the last thing I'll say here is I received 17 emails over the weekend and calls requesting compassionate use and single-use INDs for favipiravir. In the middle of running randomized controlled trials, I can't possibly entertain all of those, My colleagues, many of whom you've heard today, are treating those patients. I can't entertain all of those compassionate use single patient INDs. So we have to move the regulators outside of their comfort zone, work with them to develop new policies, and I'm hopeful that you and your colleagues, with your hands on those levers, can force that policy and get them out of what they know, and start thinking a bit creatively in the middle of a pandemic.
And I'm quite sure that the Results Act, I think I'm a co-sponsor of that, ties in very nicely with Right to Try. That allows patients and doctors to use a drug that's approved by another body, let's say whatever the FDA equivalent is for the EU, correct?
Right. So drugs that are approved in other well-established jurisdictions like Europe or Canada or Japan, for example, it would move the agency, the FDA, to review and treat as equivalent that review and approval, and so it would greatly speed the process of getting drugs available.